What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. All right, so Bryan, you've done quite a bit in your career. Just to name a couple of highlights, you joined Square at about 150 people and led talent there. You were the CHRO at Yahoo during the Marissa Mayer turnaround years. And now you've been the head of people at Nextdoor for the last 6 years. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan.
So excited to have you.
So stoked to have you.
Yeah.
All right, I want to start with Nextdoor. So you're currently there. It's a fascinating company. I'm a user. I think my entire neighborhood is a user. But as it relates to some of the dynamics recently, it's pretty interesting. So Sarah Friar, who was the CEO, stepped aside last year. And Nextdoor's founder is now back in the seat. What has that transition been like for you?
It's definitely been an interesting year. You know, this is my, I just passed my sixth year anniversary at Nextdoor a couple weeks ago, actually. And when I joined in 2018 with Sarah, you know, we were coming in as really the beginning of the second era, where at the time, Nirav Tolia, who was the founder CEO, was moving up to the board, and we were the incoming leadership team. And so, 5 years later, Sarah steps aside, Nirav comes back as CEO. And so we're really kind of in this third era of the company. And what's been fascinating, like when many founders return, is you're trying to think about the origin days of the company, find that early startup magic. And so we're trying to take the best of that with also what we learned in those 5 years of the second era. We're really scaling the company. We raised money. We took the company public. And so now in this year three, what's been interesting is you're trying to create a new time for the company by borrowing the best of those first two time periods.
Totally. So, founder mode is all the rage right now. Are you living in founder mode?
It's actually an interesting story because what Nirav shared when he was thinking about coming back at the beginning of the year or really getting ready to come back, he was thinking to himself, like, someone must have looked at this, like someone must have studied founders returning and how to think about this, how to come back with a set of principles. And he discovered this book called The Founder's Mentality by James Allen, who's a Bain consultant. And he just kind of sent him a cold email on LinkedIn. He didn't know him. And he was like, I founded Nextdoor. I'm kind of coming back. Would you talk to me? I'm just kind of curious about this. And so we've really taken some of the principles from his book and from this practice and put it to work. And this was maybe 3 or 4 months before the founders mode kind of exploded on Twitter. I think it was around, late spring, early summer. And so it's been fascinating for us to be kind of thinking about this founders mentality framework that's come from studying hundreds and thousands of companies and why founder-led companies are often more successful. And to in parallel kind of see the conversation around founders mode, which I personally think started very kind of superficial and a lot of platitudes and kind of it when you see it type of thing. But now it's kind of starting to evolve to be really more precise and prescriptive about what we mean.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Nextdoor as well. Also a user like you, Nolan. I got to be honest, though, I drive like a lunatic. And so I'm afraid that I'm going to show up on there like, hey, this car, watch out. Like, I'm serious. But it's a great product. And we talk a lot, about people that are in hyper growth mode and how they're, scaling these companies like blitz scaling and growing very quickly. You've been at Nextdoor for 6 years, which is rare in the sense of being in this role at one company for 6 years. I mean, if you look at me, I'm like 3 years, 4 years tops. And I love that. I don't think we dig into that enough. Like how is that journey, Bryan, as far as doing this for 6 years and kind of the ups and downs or repeats or tearing? Like, tell us about that. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of started this story at Square. It makes me feel a lot younger because before Square, I was at Google for 8 years, and I joined Google kind of 5 years after I came to Silicon Valley and the .com boom. Yep. I think the reason that's interesting is, I was at Google for 8, but then like you, I was at Square for just about 3 when it was kind of went from startup 150 people to 1,600 people. It went public a couple months after I left. I was at Yahoo for just about 2 years. And so when I was looking for my next thing after Yahoo, I wanted to be intentional on it. I've got to make a choice where I can really get into it. Because I think especially in the world of people, things like culture, this stuff can take a while, And so I just wanted to be able to see different iterations and how things evolve.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning, like these different eras and what the through line is and what changes. And so, yeah, it's that tenure is increasingly rare, but I think it's a real benefit if you can pull it off.
Yeah. And I mean, especially the past 2-ish years when things were, not like they were in 2021, et cetera, the skill sets are so different. And I was like, the skill set to be a hyperscaler, all these things, it's nice and shiny and great. It's also just as important to have a skill set around surviving, downsizing, reiterating, reinventing a company. And not a lot of CPOs do that for 6 years. So I just wanted to kind of hear about it.
Yeah, for sure. So if you look at those 4 companies, Google, Square, Yahoo, and Nextdoor, I spent 10 years combined at Google and Yahoo, tens of thousands of employees. And then I spent 10 years basically combined at Square and Nextdoor, which is more of that couple hundred, 500 plus phase. And they're really different organizational challenges. When I was thinking about joining Yahoo, I had felt like my career at that point had largely been growth and scaling. Google grew, when I joined, it was 3,000 people. When I left, it was like 80,000 people. Wow. And Square, like I said, grew from 150 to 1,600. But Yahoo was a turnaround, and I'd never really kind of looked at those set of challenges before, and I was really curious about it. And it was similar when I joined Nextdoor. It was both a startup, but it was also a change in leadership. So I thought it had elements of both. Yeah. And I think that thing that I learned in these last kind of 10 years of turnaround is, that the headwinds are much more apparent, if I'm kind of stating the obvious. But what can be tricky when you're growing, and this is kind of why I roll sometimes all the geniuses that say how they did it, is sometimes the tailwind is what did it. The product market fit of the company makes everyone look like a genius. And when you're doing a turnaround, like anything going right is probably because of your idea and effort. You're getting no help,
Totally.
So that you feel like you're failing all the time. But when you get a win, that you actually planted a flag somewhere that really worked. And then I think that helps when you go back into growth mode because you have more clarity around what works and what doesn't.
That is such a great point. And especially, those who are recruiting like lieutenants of any kind, HR or not, it's like, look for those that have stuck it out and built something when the tailwinds weren't there. And, they get
matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
And it doesn't matter because when you win, it covers up all of those warts. That was one of my learnings from this year.
One of the things that I feel like I've known for a while and is just so hard to operationalize with recruiting is the way people chase successful logos. And they use a company that's successful as a proxy for, they must be good.
100%.
So much of the time. Yeah. And if you just take the thought I was saying, you learn so much more in these environments where, it's not working. Just take sales. Salespeople have to sell something that's hard to sell. They're better at selling than selling something that is everybody wants to buy. And you can apply this to almost any problem. Yeah. And the best principle that really helped anchor this for me comes from the Kapoor Center in Oakland, California. They're longtime venture firm in the Bay Area, and they taught me anyway or I learned from reading about something they had written about the idea that the distance traveled is really what you should look at. You should study how far someone has had to come to get where they are. And this recruiting of logos is like the opposite. You're looking at where someone is today as kind of like their story. And again, it's just every company I see, they want to borrow from other companies' success by taking people from there.
Yeah, there's a term for it now, the halo effect.
The halo effect,
And it's such a false signal because, I'm working with a lot of early stage founders right now. And one of the things that they'll do inevitably when we're talking about open roles and what they're optimizing for is I want somebody from like XYZ hot company.
Totally.
And it's such it could be true, right? Especially if they were like there early, you were really early at Square, which I want to talk about in a second. If they were there early and they've seen some shit, but if you hop on the rocket ship and the destination's already determined, I find that those people actually they miss the most important ingredient, which is dealing with adversity. And over the last couple of years, everybody in tech has dealt with a shit ton of adversity. But some of these companies, man, it's just so easy there. You don't actually get what it's like to have been forged in the fire And candidly, those are the people that you want when things start to go sideways.
I think the second thing is they probably don't know a lot about why stuff worked. They think they know, but they kind of picked it up midstream and they weren't there for the insights. I was talking to a founder last week who wanted to learn about early Square recruiting, and he had heard that we had done like these events. He was like, "Well, tell me about these events. They were so special. Like, what was the trick?" And I was like, "It wasn't the event. It was the fact that our CTO is the late Bob Lee. So sad to see him go. He was the most prolific recruiter of engineers I've ever seen. So we would do the party where like, hey, can someone bring 1 or 2 engineers as a referral? I'm not kidding. He would show up with 50 people, all of them like great engineers. And so it wasn't that we just had this event, but somehow people are hearing that you need to throw an event. The event for us totally doesn't matter without that ingredient.
Yeah, that makes total sense. All right, so
it reminds me of
Go ahead,
really quick. It reminds me of that episode. Remember, we had Peterson Conway. Maybe it was about over a year ago, but he was like, "We search for people that are chess players based out of some country." I mean, looking for these backgrounds of what makes up the individual, and to your point, like what they've been through, what they've done is that trick, and that's a hard thing. Maybe one that AI can't quite grasp yet, but
I like asking people in Sorry, I was going to say on that point. Like, I like asking people in interviews, like, "Tell me about your hardest day." Yeah. Hardest day is everybody's hardest day, right? But when they kind of walk you through like what happened, you can put them on a spectrum of like, do you think that was actually hard? Yeah. Is it something that's like not that big of a deal, or were you like, "Whoa, I couldn't handle that. No way."
Yeah. Yeah. On that point, actually, one of my favorite questions: what's the hardest thing you've done in your life?
Same.
I actually got a terrible answer on that, like on Friday, and I was like, "This person hasn't seen anything."
Yeah, that's tough.
She said her wedding, and I was like, "That can't be like what? Like, you want to take a minute, think about this?" All right, let's talk about.
I mean, you never know. You never know.
I clicked in; it was not real.
Okay.
All right, so let's go back to Square. So when you were at Square, it was such an interesting time. So 150 people. Jack is still at the helm. Keith Raboy is the COO, who's a very eccentric personality. You told me a story about how you guys ran manager training during our prep call. Can you tell that story now?
Yeah, sure. Manager training is really hard, especially when you're in that scaling phase, because when you're growing, it's like everybody's stretched. The classic thing of you hire the person and then 6 months later, the pace of growth has outgrown their capability. So you want to like improve your chances that the leaders you're bringing in are going to be able to do more. And so training is kind of the obvious way to do this. But I've found in these smaller stages, like no one has time. No one shows up. It doesn't matter how good the domain expert is. They're like, "I just don't have 2 days." So then everyone tries to say, "Hey, I know your course is 2 days. Can you get it down to like 90 minutes? Which is like ridiculous, but it's very common, there's time allocation. And so what was unique about Square was in our original, or our office on 5th and Mission, when you walked in the door, there was a bookshelf. And it was just kind of books that Jack thought everyone should have. And we would give out books as part of their orientation. But what we started doing is when a new leader would join is we would give them like the top row and we would have them pick a few books that had helped them think about their own leadership style. And so I was like, okay, people like the books. I was really struggling with like, what are we going to do? We got to do something. And so what we said was, we're going to take our 4 most senior executives. So Keith Raboy, Sarah Fryer had just joined as CFO, Jesse Doroguster ran the hardware team that basically built all the Square products, and then Jack. And we paired each leader with like a TA. And so we picked like a next level leader down. And so I was Keith's TA. And what we said was, you're just going to pick a book. And you're going to show up and you're just talk about this book and explain all the different things in the book that helped you, that a manager should think about. And this is how we're going to do it in like 90 minutes. And everyone will go because all the leaders are there. They will make time if the most senior people are there. That's, the senior leaders kind of role modeling. I'm teaching you, so you better go teach people. And the book is like, I just decided the book's good enough. We don't need our own branded kind of leadership training yet. We're still early. It was still early in like our cultural DNA. So just having them talk would give us, we could figure out what was useful there. The book that Keith chose was High Output Management by Andy Grove, which interestingly, classic text now, still getting old. It was written in 1982. But funny, the last chapter is called Training is the Boss's Job.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
I think that you have to struggle with the leaders are so busy, but one of the best ways to get stuff out of people is to increase their capability level. And the best person to do that is their manager or the leaders. And so I always it was pretty successful. We got all the leaders in a room together and talking. So we started to get some consistency. And I've always just taken that principle. I always want to try to find a way to have leaders teaching built into the culture of the company. It's the best way to get people to show up and try.
I have such a strong point of view on this, and it's exactly that. Everyone's always like, well, how do you train leaders? What's the best leadership development program? What is this, polished, shiny thing that we can do? And I'm like, you know what? It's kind of like culture. This is kind of like culture. Everyone's like, well, culture is values or this event. I'm like, no, it's not. It's the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points that everyone in this company experiences every day in and out that make up an experience in a culture. That's what it is. What's training? It's the real experiences, data points, conversations, serendipitous learning that these folks are getting. And so I just can't handle the classroom stuff. I'm like, whatever you need to do to make it a part of the flow of the day, the business, that's how it is. And leaders teaching leaders, I think, is an incredible component of that.
Yeah, I think the role modeling is really important. No matter how good the domain expert you bring in from the outside, and I don't want to diss the industry.
No.
There's lots of incredible coaches and teachers there, but when you're really setting the stage for what your culture is going to become in the leadership ranks, kind of the leaders investing time in this makes a statement.
Totally. And I don't want to diss them either. It's just, I do believe that they're necessary and not sufficient.
Yeah. I also think, because I think about the bigger companies I worked at, I learned incredible trainings at Google when it was really big. But when you're bigger and you're more mature, really more defined, these things become like a tool in a toolkit. Startup is so chaotic and crazy. You really want to start to imprint the foundation of what the culture is going to be first before you start importing stuff. And I think I've definitely learned lessons along the way of, if you haven't defined this well and you're growing really quickly, what happens is you tend to, everyone hires through networking. So you get these tribes of people coming from another company. You know what I mean? You see this at every company that's scaled. All the Google people that went to Facebook, all the Google people that went to Twitter, all the people now that are moving on from Stripe and go to these other places. There's these pathways where networks follow each other. And they will bring the old culture to work, their new job. And if the startup or the smaller company has to really define how you do it here, it's like an invasive species. And you get this group from the outside starts using their operating system and it's like a second language. It's really like actually not understanding the language, and people are speaking around you in another tongue, And so I've really come to learn it's so important for companies in the early stage to define what their culture is, so that you kind of get the new people to assimilate versus kind of bring their own group tendencies.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can outsource in the early days. There's a lot of admin and bullshit to deal with that you can just like give away. Culture and training managers is not one of those things. I think the failure mode actually is bringing in one of those outside experts. I did it. I did it at Carta. That was actually like one of the mistakes that I made, because I was like, oh my God, everyone's super busy. Let's bring in like the reputable firm who does manager training to like come help us. And look, they gave like some really good foundational, like here's how to manage sorts of things. Like they have best practices.
Right.
But the problem is if it's not applicable specifically to that company in that moment in time, invasive species is the perfect analogy, because it's like, well, why are we doing this now? Like, that's not us.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what is us? And the only thing that can define us is the leadership, and especially in a founder-led company, usually just the founder.
I definitely agree with that. And I think the other thing you run the risk of is it can also limit innovation. If you hire people you're kind of following in the path of, like at Square, we talked a little bit about this. Square was really trying to disrupt the payments landscape, really trying to change the way things worked. And even though Keith had come from PayPal, we really had it was like an executive decision from Jack in particular. Keith was on board too, is we were not hiring anyone from the payments industry. And what often happens in an industry that's getting disrupted is the people in the industry see the disruption sooner. And so they want to go to the new startup. And we had all these applicants from people from other payments, from the space that wanted to join Square. At Fair and Unfair, it was like a hard no. And the reason for that was we didn't want someone to come in with a lot of domain expertise explaining why things wouldn't work. And when you're being innovative, and this is what founders iconically do, is they just question why something is a certain way on a very big way. And they don't let someone explain you're not going to be able to do that. Like they don't get, people try, that's what is so impressive about people that start companies. They all talk about the number of, rejections and resistance, people that wouldn't write them a check they had to go through, but they're just relentless. And ultimately that's what leads to the big changes.
Yeah.
That is a crazy learning for me. So you guys are building a payments company, which by the way, like payments has so much nuance and like specialty areas that you have to understand like how the thing works. You literally had like the COO who was PayPal Mafia. And he was the person who was like, no, we don't want to like bring more of these people over.
Well, Keith's widely proclaimed himself as a contrarian, you know what I mean? And so I think he, in his own way, is biased towards not doing it the way lots of people have done it before. So I think he was a good person to have there, but he didn't want to copy what PayPal had done or what anyone else had done. He was kind of biased towards doing something disruptive and new. But I do think it's like this comes back to what you're saying, is like so many founders are like, oh, we need experience. We need to hire from this company that we're disrupting. And when you bring those people in, they have tried what you tried maybe, and they just convince you not to do it. That's really kind of the insight. If you're going to be disruptive, the real winners come from going their own way.
Yeah. I just want to accent how hard that is, though, because we can sit here and say, don't do this. And when you're in that freaking hot seat and trying to get something going, you're under pressure, you're trying to get, customers, and that is a really hard thing to like be disciplined about not doing. I would think.
It's why so many people fail. It's why so many startups fail for this reason. They don't know how to do something and they don't figure it out. Right. Yeah. But I think as you start to find success and product fit, again, people start to chase you. The resume, the volume, no one's sending you their resume when you haven't figured it out. But as soon as people start to click in, they get more funding, they start to become more visible.
Sure.
The risk profile changes and people want to go, back to a smaller stage than they are currently.
Yeah. Nolan, you're a founder. I can't imagine how hard that is not to take a bite of that apple when it's sitting in front of you.
Yeah. Bryan, you said something really interesting about the senior talent convincing you not to do things because they've seen how it's been done before. So I think on a related note, just broadly in tech, hiring is starting to come back. And as I'm talking to founders, literally every conversation has some sort of this version of, I want somebody senior for this role. And my concern, my broader concern actually is, I'm worried that tech companies are under indexing on early career talent. And we're going to have this like really large swath of high potential people that we should want in tech, that should be working at like the best tech companies in the world, that we're going to miss on. But you actually brought up a different reason, which I hadn't considered, which is, well, senior people actually have seen things, which in some areas can be good, but in especially innovation areas can be really bad, because they're not going to reason from first principles. They're going to reason from analogy and pattern matching what they've already seen. Yeah, that's a really interesting take.
Yeah, so I think so. Pattern matching is a word you hear a lot as desirable. We want someone who can pattern match, and what that means is we want someone who's seen the problem before, so they can help us get to success faster, right? And it gets what I fear is a real risk is gets back to what we were saying earlier, which is if they're just literally matching patterns. Like, I saw this at my last company, I see it at this company, I know what to do. If they don't understand the problem on a deeper level than just recognition, the pattern matching might work at first, and oftentimes does. So right away, they get quick wins. They get more credibility. They get more resources because they're like, I know what to do. But at some point, the pattern doesn't match anymore. And then what do they do? And so, to use your words, like the people who can break the problem down into principles, who have mastery of these problems because they've seen them in lots of different ways and they know why the pattern doesn't match anymore. That's really hard to find, right? But I think the trap is, so there's not knowing what to do at all. There's having seen this before, and then there's knowing what to do. At least not knowing what to do, you're trying stuff and you kind of see its failure. The success that's like short-lived can be so dangerous for companies. It's almost like you started going down this hallway and then you're at a dead end. So now you have to go backwards, and I see this a lot in technical organizations where you want engineers who have done this before. They did it at this other company. They come in, they start doing what they did before, it works, and then it just doesn't work anymore. And to your point, like it's probably not the person that built the system at the other company. It's someone who joined a bigger team. And so they don't know why certain things were a certain way. Those are kind of the key concepts to be able to differentiate your new problem from the old one.
So if I'm in the audience, I'm like, that's wonderful, gentlemen. Like, how do I interview for that? What do I ask? How do I think about that in the hiring process? Because I think we all would agree that a lot of it is, hey, Bryan's done this at 3 other companies. This is great. Get him in here. We need this. What are folks missing in that hiring process they should dig into? And how would you do that in addition to that?
Well, hiring's hard. First of all, hiring's never easy. You all know that. I think I try to be as aware of the traps as I am about the magic bullet, because I don't think there's any magic way around it. And getting back to like the way people chase logos is I get anxious when you start to hear everybody using like the right language. They start walking in and using things like talent density and principle versus playbook, and they're just speaking Silicon Valley Twitter. And what happens is people think, oh, these people totally know what they're talking about, right? But they really just have this vocabulary of the moment, and I worry how often that signal early on, because you guys know this, the first couple minutes you've kind of already decided. And so that familiarity is a mask for their capability level or their intelligence, their problem solving capability, and so that's one risk I think all the time. So asking people, oh, tell me about your last company, which I idolize and love. And they telling you about this company you admire, and now you're like, oh, wow, this sounds amazing. We should totally hire them. You're not really getting into what did they solve or not solve. And then I'm always a big believer, can people explain complicated things in simple terms? That's the complex language. You're like, oh, wow, I don't know what that means. This person sounds really smart is often a trap. If they can explain this complex stuff I don't understand a really simple way, I feel like they understand it much better. And you can use that in any domain, any function. That's a good way to do it. I
could not agree more. And now that we're here and you said it, let's kick around talent density a little bit, because it's out there. It's a very smart word.
It's out there a lot. I believe it's from the No Rules book by the CEO of Netflix. Here at Nextdoor, I was lucky enough to work with Leslie Kilgore, who was on our board for many years. She was the CMO of Netflix. She's prominently featured in the books. I got to ask her all sorts of questions about this. Yeah. I see talent density all over my LinkedIn feed now. Everybody's got talent density. I've kind of decided it's the 2024 word for we have a world-class team. And again, I think it's an important concept. Basically, it means, everyone who works here is talented and awesome, and we won't let anyone who's not talented. I think it's pretty rare for a company to be able to achieve that. I felt like, again, 100 years ago now, but in the early 2000s at Google, I felt Google really had that when it was hundreds of people. Yeah. But I think one thing Google had going for it, again, this is now 2002, so a million years ago, but no one was hiring when Google was imprinting its leadership, when it was going from hundreds of thousands of people. The .com era had just exploded, and so there was literally no competition. And so Google was a great company with no one to compete against. Similarly, Facebook was going from hundreds to thousands. Again, really important leadership imprinting moment. That was happening in 2008-9 during the financial crisis. Also, like the brakes stopped where Facebook was scaling. So there's like these macro advantage for both of them to outcompete when there's no competition. That I think in the AI space today, there's so much freaking competition. I think it's hard for anyone to say. Again, once you get past like 30 people, I love all the geniuses of 30 people in companies that explain to the world how it works with a 30-person company. But really maintaining that density to hundreds and thousands is very, very, very hard.
Yeah. In all seriousness, no, I think you raise a great point that I could not agree more with, is being able to explain something and break it down with simplicity in a way that, someone on the street can understand. Just, requires you to understand it that much more. And I coach HR leaders and business leaders right now, Bryan, and it's incredible how intimidated senior folks can get by these words and these big phrases, and it impacts them in their role, et cetera. And so I think it's important just to make sure that everyone knows this is what it is. Don't get intimidated by the fancy words. Trust your gut, know what you're doing, research, benchmark, et cetera, but have your own point of view. And I think that's more pervasive than we actually probably talk about.
Well, and you need to be able to explain it to like a fifth grader.
Totally.
That's actually I think, you talked about mastery earlier, Bryan.
Yeah.
And I think Robert Greene said this, who's like the author on the space. Yeah. His take is like, if you can't explain it to like a fifth grader or a third grader, then you're not a master at the thing. And to your point on language, I learned this a few years ago when we were just starting to build Continuum, and I was like learning about all these marketplace dynamics. And I said at Christmas, disintermediation, which is like the biggest douchebag word of all time. And my family was like, fuck, what? And it was like a really important moment for me. I was like, oh my God, like I actually can't explain what that is. And I didn't know it well enough at the time.
Yeah.
And it was an exposure moment for me of like, I actually have a lot more homework to do. And not only just homework, but like actually being in the field, using the thing, because you nailed it on VC Twitter. It's super easy to just take all the words that they're using and then build that into your vocabulary and use that in your vocabulary. But the true masters at it can break it down to anybody, regardless of what field they are in or what age they are.
I agree. And the language is like contagious. People hear a new expression, it sounds really cool. VC Twitter loves to do kind of the weirdly paradoxical metaphor.
Yes.
And they just take off, and people, again, throw it around to sound cutting edge. It's totally not cutting edge. It's just new words.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, it's
I think
a tradition in the Valley.
The second piece of talent density we haven't talked about, and I feel like kind of gets under discussed, is the talent that's currently in the building and up leveling that talent. So it feels like the moment we're currently in right now is, well, we every year we're going to manage out the bottom 10% of the organization. Elon famously does this at Tesla. Essentially every year Tesla runs a riff. And as friend of the show, Colleen McCreary, talks about, she's like, that's just like they do a crash diet before they're going on a beach holiday, which I totally agree with. What's your take on these, because it's actually coming up more and more now. I feel like now Elon has gotten so powerful, especially in the founder community, that what he does is essentially viewed as gospel to all of these founders out there. And they're like, well, we should just manage out the bottom 10% every year. How do you feel about that practice in and of itself? And then second order, What's your take on how to up level people that are already in the organization?
Yeah. Okay. So the first one, especially in a people leader role, like you have to understand what you're doing to maintain performance. That's kind of what it is. You know, how are you having managers and leaders of the company push their teams and push forward? You know, and I think the CEO has to be the ultimate person who's pushing everyone. You know, Elon kind of does this out in public a lot, but really, if the CEO is probably the fastest gear in a successful place. They're like the last line of defense for maintaining urgency and intensity with what they're doing. And so how that works for you culturally really depends on the type of company you are. You know, like the whole conversation around performance reviews is not new. It's decades of getting rid of performance reviews or bringing them back or doing them once a year or doing them every week. This has been going on forever, you know, of like, what should you do? And so at some point, you know, the companies that take this light touch now and no longer requirement and say, we'll just do check-ins, over time, it's most likely you're going to lose intensity and rigor because managers are busy and conflict is hard, right? And so when you feel like you pull back too much, you end up implementing things like, no, you have to write it down. I want you to be able to show me what was communicated to them. That leads either to emails or written reviews or whatever. Then that becomes overburdensome, too administrative, and you cut it back again. But it's very kind of company dependent on what you need to do right now. But there's not like, I just don't think there's a best thing. There's a best thing for your company in the moment, right? And so how you drive that forward, particularly as you get bigger, that's what's so hard. In a company of under 100 people, you can run around and yell at everybody who's not working, and the pace will pick up. You know, thousands of people, you're really dependent on layers of leadership to do that. And it gets diluted the further away you get from the leadership team. So what's your approach? You're either going too slow because it's too administrative, or you're not doing enough because it's too casual. Mm-hmm. And I think people leaders need to kind of lean in and out on that. And then on the second point about kind of the up leveling, again, you know, it's from high up at management. He's really simply explains like there's only two ways to get someone to do more. It's either their motivation or they don't know how to do it. In my test, which I take from this book, is could you do it if your life depended on it? You know, like if I was going to be shot, if I didn't play the violin, that's a wrap. You know, like that's it. If I needed to run a 6.5 minute mile, I couldn't go do that right now. But if my life depended on it, I might break that time. And so the manager can decide, what is my approach here? Do they know how to do it and they just don't want to? Or do they not know how to do it? And I think that is true at all levels of the org. The jobs get bigger for people. The pressure goes up. Is it that they just don't know what to do, or it's becoming too much for them to want to do it? You know, and I think this stuff changes. Again, I think especially when you're scaling, it's so funny. I've seen it so many times. This person comes in and they are the new hotness. The company is like, we are saved. And then 6 months, a year later, again, this is really in hypergrowth. They're way over their head, and they were ahead of the curve 6 months ago, and 6 months later, it's like they're getting layered, you know, or they've got to move on, and that's just the chaos and volatility of you know, changing circumstances, where the business goes down or the business is going up really fast. Yep.
Hey, moving from the chaos of the early stage companies to the Googles and Yahoos of the world, our audience has broadened a ton over the last year, Bryan. So we have a lot of different industries and sizes, and your background I love, and it's kind of rare that we've had on the show, which is, you know, the Googles and the Yahoos, and then the chaos and whatnot. And I was at Yahoo earlier than you. I don't know if we overlapped or not, but I think the learnings around what happens at these big companies, like not really their demise, that might be, you know, too strong of a word, but you know, what did you see in those later years? Because I left right before Marissa came on, and I think you kind of took the company through that next evolution. And I'd love just to get a view of how was that at these larger companies? What happens?
Yeah. Like, so I'm remembering a metaphor from earlier. It's so funny. The founder of Gupta Systems, Uman Gupta, was like an early Oracle employee. I was told by a founder that he said this, and then Gokul Rajman introduced me to Uman Gupta, and he's like, never said that. Don't know what you're talking about. But it doesn't mean. But the metaphor is really, really good.
Did he say talent density? Did he say talent density?
What he said was, he says when he talked to a manager or a leader who's hiring, he says, "Are you a dirt road manager, a gravel road manager, or a paved road manager?" And if you use that as a mental metaphor for the world you're in, you know, a dirt road is like a 20-person startup. There's no signs, no road. You are basically in the jungle. And some people freaking love this. I can't do this. It's people that like do this are nuts to me, but they like working on every single topic every day. You know, they don't want a lane. They want to literally do everything. And the diversity of challenges is really interesting to them. And then a gravel road is kind of in the middle. It's got like elements of a startup, but some things are really clicking in. You all know that experience of like, you're on a gravel road, it's better than riding in a dirt path, but it's still kind of rocky. And I think this is a lot of where people really want to be in tech. And then the paved road is like the big company. You know, it's like you can go really fast, but you can't really change directions very easily or whenever you want. You have to kind of take the off-ramps. And what I took from that, like bigger companies, the reason why a lot of, I think, startup or smaller company people get frustrated and fail is they want to constantly be creating and changing and doing things. And at bigger companies, it's about like really aligning and taking a long time to align a lot of people and staying the course with what you're going to do. And if you can achieve that, you can really operate in a big, big way. But what you can't do is change your mind every 2 or 3 months about what to do. The whole thing just becomes paralyzed, right? And so what I really saw that at Google and at Yahoo was you know, you kind of set the simple course that everyone can understand, but then it takes a long time to get that many people around like at Google and Yahoo, there's, you know, dozens of countries, tens of thousands of people. Again, you can't just startup people kind of want the all hands where everyone's in the room and you clap your hands, like everybody understand, everybody ready to go. And like with 50 people or 100 people, you're good. Everybody knows, you can see everyone nodding their head. But at some point around hundreds or thousands of people, you can't just say that to all hands and everyone gets it. You know, there's too much nuance, too much context. And so you need the groups of people to really align around what are the key ideas. And that's just such a different skill set than happens in these much more rocky kind of creative chaos of startups.
Yeah. I mean, you wonder back to the, you know, why I asked, like, is this defensible? Right? Because everyone loves to complain about the big company. Oh, they're terrible. They're this. It's like, what do you expect? Yeah. There are hundreds of thousands of people. Like, is this really defensible at some point? Because I always said that the secret to success in all these companies is like, as you get bigger, it becomes a big game of telephone. And the companies that do the best, like they are the best at playing the game of telephone where the first person and the last person say the same thing. And however you can figure out how to do that as best you can is the winner. And I just, at some point, the law of numbers, it just makes it really hard. And so I guess I don't like when a lot of people come down on these big companies because it's just what happens.
I found too, a lot of people, because so many people leave the big company, go to a startup, you know, and that's like the Silicon Valley journey. Yep. A lot of times it's because what we talked about before, that their capability level did not meet the set of challenges that come with working at a much bigger scale. And so their stories, I want to go back to smaller one. I am more effective, but that's not necessarily a judgment on the big company is bad or failing. It's just different and requires a different skill set and intention about what you're going to do.
Totally. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good take. I want to take 1 minute to talk about, you said the word alignment. You've worked with some eccentric leaders. You've worked with some, I would say, like stable leaders. Now you're back into a company to where the founder is back in the seat. How do you take the time to align with these people? How do you make sure that you're speaking the same language? Because, I always view the CPO job as, the founder's job is culture, but then your job is to kind of operationalize that culture. And in order to do that really well, you need to be hyper aligned with these people. So what is your secret to doing that?
Yeah, so I think one thing I've learned that I think more people leaders in particular should figure out is not every great people leader is great for a CEO. Like you've got to really understand the stylistic match, the values alignment or contrast that's going to make you effective. I think so much, it's like you said, they're looking for people with certain domain expertise. I want someone senior. I want someone with a background in recruiting. That has like nothing to do with what's going to make the partnership successful between the CEO and the CPO. And so the more self-aware the CPO is on what they bring to the party, again, like try to be specific. Some CEOs are really into conflict, like they're really assertive. They're very decisive. They are quick to pull the trigger. They are quick to move, and this can wreak all sorts of havoc in the organization, particularly in a startup as you get bigger. And so a CPO that can partner that with like adding patience, and kind of being thoughtful some of the time. Like sometimes the move is to not make a move. And those types of CEOs never think of that. They want to make a decision. And so that style matches really well. If you have a really directive chief people officer and a really directive CEO, it can be kind of like too much energy. On the same side, if you have a conflict avoidant CEO, which is very common in tech, it's good to have that assertive CPO to make sure that the tough conversations are on the table or happening. But if you have two conflict avoidant people in these two roles, the place is going to go nuts because the issues won't really be coming to the head fast enough. And that's just so important for the executive team to figure out. So I really think it's like understanding like what strengths are you going to bring that will augment the leader? And sometimes it's the contrast. It's not more of what they're good at. And when I talk to people, they don't spend enough time on this. You know, they ask you about your expertise, you know, the scale you worked at, the type of problems you solved, and not how you're going to do these things together. You know,
that's such a great point.
And you have to spend time with people to learn that.
Yeah.
Time, there's no substitute for time on this topic. There's absolutely no substitute.
And my add on that, because I made this mistake early in my career, is to make sure that founder wants the contrast.
Exactly.
And is looking for that versus it backfiring potentially when you're giving it.
Yeah, I would not let a founder say to a chief people or a CEO to a chief people officer, like, you help me define what the role is. They in this world in particular, they have to have a point of view on the problems that you're going to partner with them on. You don't need to do that with engineering or sales. Like, you can bring a person in and they can really set the direction on their function. It's just the founder CEO is too close to the culture and the people for you to pretend like it's going to be delegated to you.
Yeah, they touch everything, 100%.
Yeah, and ultimately they're the decider on everything.
Yeah,
and the chief people officer is typically the person who is the implementer. And
this tends to be a topic they don't let go of. You know, like I think especially in tech, the founders tend to stay with product and with culture. It's sometimes more, but I feel like it's always those two.
Yeah.
You know, that they hold on to. That's definitely, you know, I'm really enjoying the experience with Nirav. That's kind of what his big focus is. But it's just so common that's what founder CEOs want to keep close. And again, some might be suited to stay close to sales as well, or engineering, depending on their background. But that's kind of additive to those first two. I think those are the primary ones.
Yep. Bryan, this conversation was excellent. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, loved it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Like I said, big fan. Keep doing it. It's awesome. We all love it.
All right. Thanks.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.